Morning, Jolene.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you? Came prepared to yeah, I actually took this home and read through it. Did you? I didn't even see it. Oh, there were two of them. There's a lot of information in it.
Good morning. I'm going to call to order our public meeting for February 6, 2018. To my left is Deputy County Attorney John Christopherson. To my far right is Jolene Sanchez, Assistant Clerk to the Board. Before we get started, I'd like to do yet again another moment of silence, this time for El Paso County Deputy Micah Flick, who was killed in the line of duty since the last time we did this, last Tuesday, for the Adams County Attorney. Let's have a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Ms. Sanchez, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Jackson? Here. Commissioner Holland?
Here.
Commissioner Sharp?
Here.
Commissioner Conti?
Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioner Baker?
Here. Commissioner Jackson, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Christopherson, are there any modifications to the agenda this morning?
There are no modifications today.
I would accept a motion to adopt the agenda.
I so move.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Holland and seconded by Commissioner Jackson. All in favor? Aye. That motion passes unanimously. This is the time that we've set aside for any citizen comments. If you're here to talk about something that's already on the agenda, we ask that you wait for that item to be called. But if there are any citizens here that would like to address the Board of County Commissioners on something that's not on the agenda, could you raise your hand? Seeing none, I'm going to close the comment period. And we are going to, I would consider a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Sharp, seconded by Commissioner Holland. All in favor? Aye. Any abstentions or objections? No? None. That motion passes unanimously. We have one public hearing under the general business items. The county attorney for this item will be Robert Hill. And Mr. Hill, would you set the foundation for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a use by special review for a solar power generation facility. It has been noticed by publication in both the Scout and the Villager, by mailing of adjacent properties, and by posting of the property as required under our Land Development Code. The board has jurisdiction to proceed.
Thank you. Our presenter this morning is Diane Koses, the case planner with Public Works and Development that focuses on energy and solar. So, good morning, Ms. Koses.
Good morning, Commissioners. As you probably know from the materials, this land development application is for a 75 megawatt solar facility on up to 750 acres. However, it looks like the actual footprint will be closer to 550 acres, and I'll let the applicant's representative explain that. I have an additional letter that was just received yesterday that I'm going to pass out now pertaining to mineral rights for these parcels. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll explain the focus of that letter in my presentation. The applicant, Hunter Solar LLC, and 4 property owners, Larry and Helen Toft, MBM Properties, John Henry Hyatt, and the estate of John Bikeley, are requesting approval of this use by special review located northwest, southwest, and southeast of the intersection of East Quincy Avenue and Brick Center Road in eastern Arapahoe County. The project basically surrounds the Eastern Service Center. The applicant presented to the Planning Commission in December. The application presented to the Planning Commission in December has changed a little in that the applicant has moved the project equipment and fencing further away from the neighbors on the north, and the applicant is working with mineral owners to reserve acreage for mineral development. The applicant increased the setbacks in response to the testimony of the planning commissioners. And the applicant's representative can provide more details about how the project is sited in relation to the neighbors. Regarding mineral rights owners, negotiations are currently ongoing. Additionally, the applicant has been working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on mitigation measures that include fencing the facility in a way that would allow for at least one wildlife migration or wildlife movement corridor. Planning Commission and staff are recommending approval with conditions of approval based on findings in the staff report. After Planning Commission, we received additional comments from Colorado Parks and Wildlife and added conditions addressing those comments. I can answer questions on those approval conditions after the applicant's presentation and the comment period. I believe 4 landowners are here. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has 2 representatives here, and neighbors of the project are present to answer questions or provide more information also. And just a quick summary about the letter that was passed out that we received from Conoco yesterday. The thrust of that letter is that Conoco, they are the leasee for Anadarko's mineral rights, and they're working with the applicant on reserving some room for potential well sites. Michelle Zimmerman, the applicant's representative for this project, will present a summary of the project. Are there any questions before we proceed to her presentation?
Are there any questions from the commissioners for Ms. Kosis? Commissioner Olin.
Since the release of the BSR, have you received any comments, positive or negative, towards this project?
No, not positive or negative concerning the project. The only thing, I received some communication from one of the landowners, but it was in line with his previous communications, which was attached to the BSR, and the letter from Conoco was the only thing received since we uploaded the documents.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions for Ms. Kosis? Hearing none, then we'll have the applicant come up and make their presentation. Good morning, and if you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Zimmerman. My address is 325 North French Street, Breckenridge, Colorado, 80424.
Good morning.
Good morning. Make sure this loads up here. Okay. Thanks so much for having me. This project, the Hunter Solar Project, I'll give a little overview of where we've been on the road of how did we end up with this project. I'll give a little bit of detail about the project specifically. I'll start first with a little overview about Cypress Creek and our work here in Colorado. So, of course, Cypress Creek Renewables, we are primarily focused on large-scale, utility-scale solar development, not necessarily the solar gardens. Not to say that we wouldn't do the solar gardens, which are the smaller 2 megawatts or less projects, but primarily our focus specifically in Colorado is the larger scale projects where we sell just to a utility, a single off-taker. We really like to focus, I think I've mentioned in the past, one of the reasons that when I decided to work for Cypress Creek, one of the reasons I chose this organization is because we try so hard to be a responsible developer, to work with the community, to work within our constituents, and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate impacts and to help make everything work nicely together. So I'm excited to show you the road we've traveled to get to where we are with Hunter Solar. You've seen this in the past. We are primarily focused in other states. We're just in the last 2 years started to work more in the Intermountain West throughout Colorado, Idaho, Utah, New Mexico, Oregon, Arizona, and even into Washington now. So we have over a gigawatt in operating assets, which is a lot, and we hope to have some operating assets here in Colorado by the end of 2018. The solar development process, where we currently are, so the unique thing about Hunter, as opposed to maybe some of the other projects you've heard, is that number one, the signing agreements with landowners, meeting with the utility, getting all of the foreground of could we even do this? Are we even near a power line? Who would even take the power? What's interesting about Hunter is it's 4 different landowners. It's actually 11 different parcels. And when we first started looking at how do we do something like this, it was a lot of stars aligning to figure out, all right, this is the right place, and I'll get into why this is the right place here in a minute. On the whole road to solar development, we're in step 2 out of 6. So we're in the planning component, of course, with land use permitting for the 1041 and the use by special review. So I wanted to get into, like I mentioned, some of the things that we've been through and why we're here, and answer some of the questions that came up at the Planning Commission meeting and that have come up in this format in Board of County Commission meetings in the past on other solar applications. So the site selection criteria, why is this spot okay? Why not a different spot? Why not, 10 feet to the right or left, or in this case, 1,000 feet to the right or left? So there's a number. You can imagine there's, 20 to probably 100 different criteria, but main ones that sort of rise to the top, of course, interconnection. You have to be able to get the power to where it's going. So we've got to be near a substation in this case. Some of the smaller solar arrays just need to be near a power line that they can tap into. But in this case, we actually have to be near the infrastructure that's involved with a substation. Topography. We need pretty much a flat area. It's really tough to put these things on a steep slope down into a canyon in a gully where it might be shaded, up on a hillside. It's pretty tough. So sometimes in a lot of areas it can be hard to find flat. Access, of course. We can't just, just like anything, you've got to have legal access and you've got to have access that can withstand fire trucks and delivery trucks and everything else. Wetlands, of course, riparian areas. We're just like anyone. We're not going to put anything in a flood zone. It's not good for us. It's not good for you. It's not good for the environment. Co-location. So that's one that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission says these utility scale projects can't be too close to one another. They actually have a mile criteria. The local states can say it has to be 2 miles or 4 miles or a half mile. But that's up to the Public Utilities Commission. And in Colorado, they've just taken the FERC rule. So we can't have one of these in one area and then another one just any more than it has to be at least a mile away. Environmental issues. That's, again, we want to make sure that we are working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Health Department, any of those to make sure that any environmental issues are going to be addressed, worked around, mitigated, or in many cases just avoided. If it's not the right place to go, let's not go there. This is a big one, land cost and willing landowners. Some people say, well, why not go put it over, right by, C470 or something like that, or E470. And it may be that in many cases those landowners don't want solar because it's more valuable for them to do commercial or real estate or something else. So, and again, in other areas, you might have people that, or counties that say we want this area to be reserved for agriculture or open space, or this is a park. So you've got to have a willing landowner that says, yeah, this is the right place for solar. It doesn't belong everywhere, just like anything. As I mentioned before, we want to be good neighbors. We learned at the Planning Commission that we weren't being a very good neighbor to the 3 homes at the north of this property on our proposed project. We hadn't had a chance to really sit down with them, to get onto their property, to take a look at how this is going to impact them. And the way we had this designed is, the normal setback is 50-foot setback from a parcel line. So we had panels going up to almost 50 feet. The fence was going to be at 50 foot, and our panels were right at about 100 feet. But as you know, out in eastern Arapahoe County, 100 feet is right there. So when we went out and walked on, met with these landowners and walked this property, we talked about, well, where could we be? How far? So one of the landowners had the wheel with the measuring thing. So we went out in the field and we said, okay, this is what 100 feet looks like. And then we went to 300 feet and 500 feet and 700 feet. And we agreed that 500 foot was pretty workable for everyone. So that was really nice. And I've spoken with those 3 landowners. You'll see renderings later on in the presentation. So it took a bunch of photos, had some photo simulations done. We've talked with the planning staff and with the neighbors. One of the things we also wanted to make sure is during construction, as I mentioned, these posts go in like fences, like fence posts, the racking posts. Well, you've got to drive those things into the ground. That's not quiet. That's noisy. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with all of the neighbors. They know our construction activities. They know in advance, hey, we're going to be coming out doing really noisy stuff right by your house for the next 5 days. What can we do? Do we need to coordinate? Are you having a big event and we need to make sure we don't do our activity during your event? Maybe we phase and we come into your area a week later or a week earlier. So just making sure that we coordinate with the neighbors on the construction, specifically with the pile driving. That's really important as well. I have talked with all 3 of those neighbors, and I think I know at least one of the homes, is here today. I don't know if the other one made it or not. And then Mr. and Miss Al and Betty Labs are not in town, so they were not able to make it. But I did speak with them on the phone 2 days ago, and they're actually in Tucson where it was 80 degrees. So they said that they're tickled that we were able to move it back 500 feet. And so they're happy about that. Noise, of course, I think we've talked about these don't make any noise. They're the only source of noise is the fan at the transformer in the inverter, and if you're 150 feet away from that, you don't hear it. The noise that comes from the fan is about what you would hear from a refrigerator running. Maybe not the new really efficient ones, but the refrigerator that most of us may have. The pollution, there's no chemicals, there's no fluids. It's a sealed panel. Property value, that's something we've talked about in the past. Again, like we did on the other projects, we hired an evaluation company, an appraiser company, to look at the impacts to property values from this specific project. I do have that report. I've forwarded along, or I will forward it along to Diane to be distributed for your review. Again, as I think we probably can all imagine, most of these projects have only been in for the past 10 or 15 years. We just don't have the kind of data that you would for a single-family home when it comes to appraisal and property values. So the data at this point suggests, from what they've seen over the past 15 years of looking at these in existence, they've not seen any impact to property values. That's the data we have. Safety, of course, all of these projects are designed by licensed engineers. We go through all the permitting, all the licensing, everything is tier 1. We have a full safety team, a whole vertical at Cypress Creek Renewables dedicated to safety. We'll have an emergency response plan that we file with the Bennett Fire Protection District. So I know that's often a concern for neighbors. And then construction we talked about. This could be up to a 9 to 12 month time frame. I'm hoping it's more like 6 to 8 months. We're getting better, but we want to make sure that we're coordinating with the neighbors. We talked about dust. That'll be controlled by water trucks brought in from outside. And of course, the health department recommended we do have wash stations, and any dumpsters have lids. We know the wind sometimes blows out there. And please feel free to stop me with any questions if you'd like.
Any questions at this point? We have one from Commissioner Conti.
Thank you. You commented about having 1 gigawatt in operating assets. I'm just wondering, how much land space does it take to generate 1 gigawatt worth of energy out of solar these days?
So, fortunately, I have my engineer, Andre Perov, is here, and he might be able to answer that probably more accurately than I can. But when I'm looking at, from a project manager perspective, I'm pretty conservative, and so I say 1 megawatt takes 10 acres, which, of course, as we see in Hunter Solar, that's not the case, because then a 75 megawatt would take 750 acres, and this one's going to take about 500 acres. So we can squish them in closer, but roughly it's about 10 acres for 1 megawatt, so that would be 1,000 acres? No. 1 gigawatt would be 5,000 acres.
About takes 5 acres per.
Okay, so 5,000.
If you could repeat what he said, because he wasn't on the microphone, but this will be your testimony, and maybe we can have him come up and clarify after your presentation.
Okay, my apologies on that.
That's okay.
So roughly 1 gigawatt would be roughly about 5,000 acres. And
just wanted to clarify that the properties that we're talking about, the parcels of land here equal about 750 acres, correct? But correct. Only 500 of those 750 acres will have the PV panels on them. Is
correct.
That okay?
Perfect.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Sharp.
So I had a question about a couple of things on property value report. Where was that done?
It was done here out of Denver by American Valuation. American Valuation Partners, AVP.
I mean, what properties did they look at? Because I know, and when we've talked before, you showed us, and I think one of the pictures here was maybe in North Carolina, because I think y'all have some facilities in North Carolina with a lot of trees around them. It's not the plains where there are virtually no trees. And so my question is, were they looking at property values that are equivalent to where this location is going in and around?
Yeah, the types of things that we would place value on here versus someplace else. Like we base value here maybe on views, whereas there they may base value on trees.
Yeah.
We do have quite a few studies in Eastern Oregon right now, and we do have a couple studies in Idaho. The rest have been more New England, North Carolina, Southeast. So we can bring up Ron Throop from American Valuation, Advanced Valuation Partners. I'm sorry, I keep messing that name up. and can speak more specifically to that report and the comparable projects that he looked at.
I just like to make sure that it's that it's here, like Apple Plains environment, not North Carolina where they have a lot more trees, and the visual impacts would be less significant.
Yeah.
I did have another question. Where was it? And I would like to maybe see that report.
Yeah, I can make sure that gets to the planning staff.
I can't find my other. I'll think of it, and then I'll ask you in a few minutes. But thank you, appreciate it.
I don't see any other questions, so please continue.
Okay, so of course one of the other conversations we had at the Planning Commission meeting was about mineral interest, and I know it's a conversation we've had as well. The mineral owners have all been identified and contacted by mail for this project, and we have been in conversation with ConocoPhillips and Anadarko. As Diane mentioned, ConocoPhillips has the lease. Anadarko owns the minerals under Section 9. Lucky enough for us, a couple of the other parcels, the landowners still own 100% of their minerals. The surface owners own their minerals, so that's helpful. We do not have a surface use agreement that we can present to you today, but we have all been meeting ConocoPhillips, Anadarko, Cypress Creek Renewables, which is representing Hunter Solar, and the surface owners to work through what the mechanics of an agreement would look like, where, okay, if we put solar here and you put, a drill pad here, when would you do explore? When would we do construction? There's just a lot of different details that need to go into this agreement, but we are all confident that we're working together, that we'll get there. But I don't have an agreement I can present to you today.
Commissioner Jackson.
This is a question for a mathematician, because I know that the drill rigs go, the lateral can go a mile or so, and is that right? And I don't know how many acres that is. So it's like if you put a drill rig on the outside of the facility, will it go where it needs to go, or do you? I see a nodding head there. Somebody knows. Can you do that, or do you have to poke holes in the middle of it? So that's just kind of a logistical geography question.
In the meetings that we've had so far, and please, if anyone wants to come up, please.
Or we could maybe ask that question for
Okay.
another. Our Diane Kosis might be able to answer that after the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have. In the meetings we've had so far, ConocoPhillips has presented to us certain areas that would work for them and certain areas that wouldn't. And they have a number of criteria, just like we have site selection, they have a number of criteria why a drill pad over here wouldn't work, but one over here would.
So one more question from Commissioner.
I did think. Can you talk about what Cypress Renewables, what your relationship is with Hunter Solar? I think that I read that it's Cypress Renewables owns 100% of the membership interests. Can you explain that?
Mm-hmm. So anytime, this is pretty common in the solar industry. Anytime you develop a solar project, you give it a special purpose entity, a special LLC, and that goes along with the project. So this project, of course, is Hunter Solar. We have a Colorado-based LLC called Hunter Solar LLC, and that is the entity that will sign the power purchase agreement with the utility, that will get paid for all the power that's produced, that will manage the construction, that will sign all of the contracts. That way, and Cypress Creek owns and manages that, but that way, if Cypress Creek Renewables LLC were to, for some reason, go away, Hunter Solar would still be able to manage, operate, maintain, hold up to all of the agreements of that solar facility. So if Cypress Creek somehow went away, Hunter Solar could still produce power, maintain, have enough money to manage the weeds or the vegetation, mow the vegetation, make sure the fence is staying up, make sure anything that goes down is maintained.
Okay. And I'll have a follow-up question, but I don't want to interrupt. I'll have a follow-up question on that later, but please continue.
Okay. So, so for the mineral owners, we think we're compatible uses, so we're excited to be working together. The solar panels don't really complain about having a drill site right next to them, so we're hoping that we can find the right places that work for everyone to get what they need. property taxes was one that was brought up in the past as well. So I'm getting better at understanding this. We've met with Division of Property Taxation at DOLA, and I've talked with Karen Hart at the assessor's office as well. And so I think we both understand what DPT has to do here. And because of the state statute that says any renewable energy project greater than 2 megawatts in size has to be assessed at the state level. So even if we wanted to apply our local assessment, we wouldn't be able to. It has to be a state assessment. Now, the state doesn't receive any taxes. They just hand the assessment down to our county assessor's office. So the estimate right now, the template that DPT has on their website, you plug in your numbers. It's this size system. It's, these various different things. And Karen and I are very close. I think we're within, a few $1,000s on our numbers. I'm using a 2016 mill number. I think she had a more recent mill number, but roughly we're in the $360,000 to $380,000 a year range total in property taxes. And divvied up, that's around $75,000 a year to the county, around $177,000 to the school district. There's some floating numbers that may change year after year. The point of the state statute was to equalize, well, there was a lot of points to the state statute, but one of the outcomes was to equalize so that the county knew over the course of 20 years how much roughly they'd be getting every single year. So it doesn't have a degradation schedule. There's a degradation schedule built in, but then it's levelized. So it's not like you get a lot in year one and then it slowly starts to decrease. It's roughly the same year after year. It does decrease at a much lower speed. So it may start at $380,000 and it may end in 20 years at $350,000. And the few things that float would be within 5%. So I can pull up the spreadsheet from the Division of Property Taxation and we can look through that if that's helpful. Or Karen and I have talked through almost every cell on there, so I know that she can speak to most of those as well. So we can come back to that.
Commissioner Holden.
To that point, in an industry that's really just beginning to emerge, what is the estimated life cycle of this facility? How long will it be operating? Will there be opportunities to upgrade the system? Thank you.
The agreement with the utility, the power purchase agreement, is 20 years. That will, and our initial lease term is 20 years. Now, what we've seen happen and what we've negotiated in other areas has been after the term of the power purchase agreement, the utility 100% of the time so far continues to buy that power. Their utilities needs to purchase and provide power are not diminishing so far. And we don't think they'll be diminishing in this area either. So we think after 20 years, the utility will continue to buy the power, and so we'll continue to operate. We expect a 35 to 40 year operating lifetime of the project. And yes, as a part of the operations and maintenance budget that Hunter Solar manages, there are upgrades built into that schedule. So we'll be upgrading the inverter after the 10th year, and then after 20 years, technology changes, and we may be able to get more efficient panels. We may be able to get the same 75 megawatts in a smaller amount of space. So yes, after that 20-year agreement, this is certainly something that Cypress Creek and I think any solar company is looking at. How do we do those upgrades at that time? But 40 years, sorry, was the short answer.
Okay, please continue.
So I'm going to move on from property taxes, but I'm happy to open up that spreadsheet later if that's desired. Wildlife concerns, of course, this is near and dear, I think, to all of us. We all love wildlife. I don't think I know many who don't. Maybe the raccoon, the occasional raccoon that digs in your trash, maybe not so much. But in general, the deer, the pronghorn, and the various mammals. And so we have been working a lot with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to figure out if National Electric Code says you have to fence these things in like a prison because they are high voltage, what can we do to allow for wildlife? What can we do to allow for vegetation to make sure that noxious weeds don't spread, but also to make it so that the animals can still move around and get to what they need, especially if you have a riparian area and a hilltop and a solar array in the middle. How the animals want to get from one place to the other. How do we make that happen? So we're fortunate with Hunter. Again, like I said, there's a lot of things that go into site selection, And I think Hunter Solar really embodies that a lot of these things that we want to consider when we talk about developing solar. We have wildlife corridors built into this project. As you can see on the north end, we've pulled back to that 500-foot setback. I do have a notch on the northwest here because the landowner there said, because of the way the topography is there, they were fine with us running a few rows up to the 50-foot setback. But we will continue to work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and if they say, hey, that little notch won't work, we'll pull it back to meet the rest, to meet the 500-foot. That's fine. That we want to do that. This is nice. We already have a drainage in here, of course, that we needed to avoid anyway, because for topography reasons and for county restrictions, the county staff and engineering, they're not going to let us put anything in there either. So that's great. We already have a corridor here. This space is often used as a corridor, which is sort of outside of our purview, but there's nothing planned there. And then we've got this area here, which is also Bellevue, right south of the substation there, if you're familiar. And then this is down the hill, but I think this is nice because it allows a lot of movement from here up to on top of the hill. So we've tried really hard to work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and we want to continue to do that. If there's any way, like I said to them, if I could convince National Electric Code to just let me fence in the equipment sheds and leave the solar panels fields unfenced so wildlife could still move, that would be great for everyone. I know in California they do allow a gap at the bottom of the fence at a couple of the big systems in the Tehachapi area. I think it's an 18-inch gap at the bottom. If we can make that happen, that would be great. We have to make sure that the National Electric Code allows it. We can't really go outside of that parameter. So movement corridor is something we're working on. Fencing, of course, we've talked about. The National Electric Code does require 7 foot, but we wanted to go to 8 foot to try to negate any kind of, if the deer are trying to jump over, we don't want them to get caught up. And at 6 or 7 foot, they might. At 8, hopefully, they won't try it. So that's the goal with 8. Surveys, we are, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, made recommendations about making sure that we're not disturbing ground nesting birds, or especially during construction, that we make sure that we're doing surveys and that we then stop work and give the necessary buffers. And then we want to continue to work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to address any of their concerns with birds, specifically with raptors as well. So we want to continue to do bird surveys for the next handful of years and work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on the details of, I don't know the biological technical details of what should go into that report and survey, but we'll want to work with CPW to make sure that it meets their needs. We've talked a bit about noxious weed management plan. That's good for everyone. We want to keep the weeds out of our area. We want to keep the weeds out of the neighbor's area. So that's part of our operations and maintenance plan. And then reduction of roadway connections. Of course, we are going to have access roads specific to our parcels. You'll see later on where the access roads are going to be located. And then the last big one that we've talked about a couple of times is local solar development and the loss of ag lands. How are we going to manage that? And a couple of the key things to remember is, at least that I find solace in, is that by putting solar on some of these lands, we're precluding them from other types of development. So that helps, because after the life of the project, this stuff gets completely decommissioned. It's removed. It's a temporary, although 40 years is a long time, it's a temporary use of the land. We're not putting in permanent structures. Everything comes out. It does allow the landowners a consistent source of income, so it allows them to diversify their portfolio, and it allows them a consistent source of income over the long term that they can rely on and depend on. So that's helpful. Like I mentioned, it is a low impact to the land. There's not any long-term, we're not paving the entire thing or graveling the entire thing. The vegetation management for the area, we want a short growth ecosystem, of course, because we don't want our panels to be shaded. But we also want to make sure there's no noxious weeds. So as we're in there, we're also going to be maintaining the vegetation. It's, like I say, it's completely decommissioned, returned to its original use. And one of the interesting things is I've had a few different folks help me on this to try to figure out, what if Excel and the PUC and Black Hills and IREA and all of the different utilities were to develop all the solar they could, what would that really be? And we're working on getting to citing studies that'll tell us that. But at our first sort of broad brush stroke, if you look at all of the solar development potential, so it's got to be near a substation or near a power line. It's got to be on a flat area outside of riparian areas. It can't be too close to urban areas because, of course, that land is going to be used for commercial and real estate or residential. So you take all of those things into account, you figure out how much that is, and you realize, well, it also, we can't just use solar. We can't have we don't have coal plants in everybody's backyard. We have one over here that feeds a lot of different people. We don't need to have solar everywhere, and we're still going to need wind. We're still going to need natural gas. We're probably always going to need coal. We're always going to need a diversified portfolio of generation. So the idea of putting solar everywhere there's not enough demand for it. The utilities can't take on that much solar. So we're looking at about 1% of, when I looked at all the acreage that's currently in agriculture in Arapahoe County, and I looked at all the acreage of solar development, the possible development, we got to about 1%. I don't have the study citation for that, so that's me and my colleagues working on this, but I'm working on getting a study on it.
Commissioner Conti.
Thank you. 1% of what exactly?
The about 240,000 acres of agricultural land in Arapahoe County.
So you're saying you could conceivably cover 1% of the land?
Of the 240,000.
Of the 240,000 acres. Okay. I just wanted to...
Yeah, my bullet doesn't do that explanation very well. So I'm hoping I can come back to you with better citation on that, but again, that was just us trying to crunch the numbers. So that was something I wanted to know as we talked about this. So, all right, so we've looked at these pictures before. This is kind of roughly what it would look like. The single-axis tracker is what we're proposing. So it would be one panel that would tilt around a north-south axis, pointing east in the morning, west in the afternoon. And then we are moving, like I say, this is the rough outline of where the panels would go. Again, we've gone back to a 500-foot setback here, and we are in communication with Anadarko and ConocoPhillips about potential of where they might need for drill pad in that area. Because we don't know yet, we're asking for the full area to be considered, but we may very well come to an agreement that carves out, something right there or something like that. So we've talked about the location and the landowners. We were at about 515 acres because we pulled the acreage back to a 500-foot setback. We're now at about 497 acres that would have the total footprint of solar. We are still at 75 megawatts, however, because our original design used modules that were about 320 watts, and our new design uses modules that are 390 watts. So again, there's that technology piece that we can kind of pull different levers, and sometimes we can get more efficient panels in a certain area, and sometimes, as you know, with the solar tariff, there's going to be a lot more of those levers being pulled in the next year or two, as you can imagine.
Commissioner Holman.
Yeah, to that point, with the solar tariff, what impact do those increased fees affect the number one, the timeline of development, and the overall cost of implementation?
So obviously we're still moving forward with this project, so it hasn't killed it, which is great. That tariff did probably postpone quite a few projects in the solar industry. A hit like that to the solar industry in general, while Cypress Creek Renewables fared well, it's still a hit to everyone. A hit to the solar industry as a hit to us. We got lucky. Our leaders basically took out an insurance policy and received a lot of financing to make agreements to have panels on stock for all of our 2018 projects. So our projects are not going to be impacted. We may have some delay specifically in projects like this that are 2019 or 2020 projects, so that we may see a delay, mainly because, as you would imagine, the tariffs on the areas where the tariffs are being imposed, those groups for the past year have already been tooling up to do new warehouses either in Canada or Mexico or other places where we can get the panels. So within a year or two, we'll be able to circumvent that tariff from a procurement perspective.
Just one more question to follow up to that, and that is when you look at the initial construction date, will this project be phased? In other words, you're going to do one area first, or you're going to do the whole thing simultaneously?
It's kind of phased, just like a residential development. You put in the roads and the sidewalks, and then you put in the garages. And well, I guess I don't know how you do that, but so it'll be phased in that we'll be going in one area, driving all the posts. We'll be going to the next area, driving all the posts. Going back to that, as the posts are being driven in the next area, the crews will be putting up solar panels in the first area, and then after they move on, they'll move to the next area and be putting panels on the posts that were already in. The next crew will come in and be putting in the equipment pads and stringing all the wires. So it will be phased in that sense, but it'll be more like a choreographed.
And how many people will be involved in the development? How many employees?
Just under about 150. Yeah, it varies, but yeah, right around there.
Thank you.
So we talked about height. These are, I think in our application we say a 12-foot maximum, and that's just because we don't, with topography, at some places we may go up that high, but nothing on this, we don't have any topography challenges, so we won't be going over 8 to 10 feet on this project. We talked about the fence. I am hoping we can do some even more wildlife-friendly things with the fence. For example, we've talked about privacy slats for view shed concerns for the neighbors, but then I didn't realize that privacy slats may be difficult for wildlife because then they see it as a wall, whereas without privacy slats, the wildlife can see through it for risk abatement. So we may want to revisit privacy slats from a wildlife perspective. So there's just some things that we want to continue to work on to make sure that it's in the best interest of the wildlife as well as the neighbors with regard to the fencing. I mentioned IREA is the offtake and the term minimum of 20, maximum of 40 years. So I just wanted to get into what the system looks like. This is the north part of the project. So that is Quincy, and this is Brick Center. So the Eastern Arapahoe Workforce Center, Service Center is right here. And then I did talk about access, that each parcel will have its own, actually the access to this parcel is down south, but each parcel will have its own access. And equipment pads and all of access are located as best as we can away from other neighbors and driveways and properties. And then this is the south part, and here's the access into there. So just to run through some of the economic benefits, we've touched on most of these already, right around the $360,000 mark on average per year over 20 years for property taxes, divvied up, of course, to the various different taxing authorities. This is enough to power approximately 16,000, just over 16,000 homes. The building permit fees on this are expected to bring in about $550,000. When we just did the quick, here's how much we think the building permit fee will be. Of course, we are not at building permit stage, so we don't know exactly. When we look at the NRAIL has a way of estimating what the actual impact in economic impact will be to a community. And when we plug our numbers into the NRAIL model, we get about $26 million of direct spending over the course of this project, majority of being in the first year of construction, of course. And total jobs, around 168, sorry, a little over 150. Why not? Community benefits. Of course, we've talked through a few of these, but the ability to maintain some large tracts that are redeveloped in the future, or back to ag or whatever they want to be, providing a source of income to these landowners, precluding more permanent development, and diversifying the electrical mix in the grid. Of course, there's the renewable energy goals of the 30% by 2020 and some other renewable energy goals. So this helps to support IREA's portion of that. And then these are the renderings. So this is the end. I'm getting close. I've got about 7 renderings in here, but wanted to give the neighbors and the county, everyone an idea of what this might look like. Again, these are simulations. Of course, they're not out there yet, so we think this is roughly what we think it will look like. And typically, we have our photo rendering guy make it be as real as possible for that time of day. So I know that that's small, so I'm going to read them to you. This one over here on Quincy looking northeast is number 8, so that's this one. This one on Quincy looking southeast is number 3, so that's this one. And I can jump back to these. I'll just advance through them. So number 5 is actually on Brick Center right there. So it's right at the Quincy Brick Center intersection, and it's looking due south. And then number 4 is also at the Quincy Brick Center intersection, but it's along Quincy, and it's also looking southeast. So that's this one. Number 7 is, again, at that intersection, but it's looking north. And then number 10 is down along Brick Center, down further south along Brick Center, just looking due south at, I'm sorry, that would be east, looking due east. And then I mentioned we did some renderings specific to the neighbors that are on the north end of the property, saying this is what we think it might look like at 500. And those of us that were out there that day think these renderings still make it look like a little close, because when we were standing out at 500 feet, it didn't look that close. So we're hopeful that it will be better than this. But photo point A is up kind of at the end of the driveway, closer to the home site there. Photo point B is down in the field, about 50 to 100 feet into the field. And then C is at the home, at the south end of the parcel of that home. So photo point C is actually from that neighbor's yard, looking southeast. And come on, there we go. B this is the one where it's in the field, looking due south. And then photo point C is, photo point A is from the home. You can kind of see where I'm standing. The home is here, is behind me, and the field is that way. So this is looking southeast, and then turning around, that's Pikes Peak in the distance. And I made it. What kind of questions can I answer for you?
Questions for Michelle Zimmerman. I did want to point out that in those pretty distant photographs, the water tower is where the Eastern Service Center is, the county property there. Any other questions for Michelle Zimmerman? Commissioner Sharp.
Since I haven't had a chance to see it, the property taxation numbers, I'd like to look at those.
Yep.
I'm sorry we didn't get those in advance, or maybe I just didn't see them, but would have been nice to have them before today.
There we go. So this is broken up. This is me getting the mill numbers from the assessor's website and breaking it down by each mill. Certainly, Karen Hart is going to be your go-to on this. I take her word, her assessment over mine.
Commissioner Conti.
Just for confirmation, what we're talking about here is the current and what would remain most probably at the agricultural zone.
Correct. So the use by special review permit, it takes it, whatever the land is now, and it allows that to continue. So yes, the underlying land would remain as it currently is, which is ag.
The gates, in our packet, there were some elevations of the fence.
Yes.
And the gates, and you mentioned the multiple access areas into each one of these separate kind of parcels. Will all those gates be about the same? And what is I know they're sliding, side to side sliding gates. Is there an ID badge or a code that opens those gates? I don't know what the security would be for those.
So those will all be locked gates. They will have the Knox access with the fire district, of course.
Right.
And I don't know if it's a code or the badge code. I'm not sure on each one. I don't know if we may be able to ask someone else in the audience. But it would, and that's going to have to match the rest of the fence. Of course, if we can do a gap underneath the gate, wouldn't include that. But
right. And the staff that's out there maintaining it, can you talk a little bit about the number of people that will be out there, and they be out there every day in different areas maintaining it? I just wonder if they're full-time or if they're going to be floating between this and other locations.
Yes and yes. So They will be 1 to 2 full-time on site. So there'll be over 10 full-time focused on Hunter Solar, but 8 of those will be at a remote location, making sure that everything is operating at is maximum production, and if anything isn't, what they need to do and going in to fix it. The on-the-ground staff will be 1 to 2, and they will probably be mostly focused on Hunter, they'll be in one area one day and one area the next day. So it may not be 5 days a week, but it'll probably be 3 to 5, and it could be 5 days a week or more if an inverter fuse goes down or something, it could be 7 days a week until that thing is fixed.
So there are alarms that would tell you when
everything is remote monitored.
How about video security? Are there cameras planned?
In some cases we do. I don't have the specs for our full operations and maintenance and security program on this yet. I've not handed this project, obviously, over to our engineering and development team, so I don't have those specs. In some cases we do security cameras, in some cases we don't, and I don't know what triggers that, but I can find out.
And the reason I was asking was not so much security, although there are concerns about, remote locations and various problems that could arise with people trying to get in for whatever reason. But the other reason was because of the wildlife. I was just wondering if something did happen with the sliding gate and vehicle pulls out, yet pronghorn or a deer gets in there. How would you know, kind of thing, if...
Yeah, a couple on that. I think one, of course, there will be 1 to 2 people out there driving around, checking it out. This area is pretty rural, but we've got the workforce, the Arapahoe County Eastern Center there.
Right.
So there are folks out there that hopefully could help report that. And if we can continue to work with Parks and Wildlife and National Electric Code to figure out how to do that gap, maybe, or escape ramps or something like that, hopefully we can mitigate some of that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Michelle? If not, then I think if it would be okay, I'd like to propose that we have our representative from the assessor's office come forward if you're planning to. We have Mark Scott here from the assessor's office, who's the county assessor. And
would you like me to leave these property tax numbers up or close them down? Okay, thanks. There's your little pointer if you want it.
Good morning, Mr. Scott. If you just state your name and your title.
Good morning, Mark Scott, Assessor's Office, and Karen Hart's going to join me too. Karen has spend more time on the number crunching. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here.
Sure.
Questions from Mr. Scott? Commissioner Sharp.
Yeah. So I have a question. I think what was stated is that these numbers would be pretty consistent over 20 years. Is that, I'm thinking that there's depreciation and that kind of thing. Is that right, that those numbers would stay consistent over 20 years?
Yes, relatively. The formula factors it in. They do start off higher and they depreciate over time.
Kind of smooth.
But the formula actually calculates that curve and then takes the total and spreads it out over the 20 years again.
Okay.
And starts it over for you. So it will stay relatively level. I don't know, in terms of land value, there might be some minor increase, but not enough to offset the depreciation from the improvements. So it'll be relatively stable. Our calculations and Karen Hart, supervisor of the Ag Department, used 2017 mill levies, and we're at about 381,000 total, about 70,000 to the county, and that excludes developmental disability, so a little over 80,000 with that. So it's certainly a significant increase, but it does stay ag the whole time.
So maybe you could tell me, and we've had this discussion on some of the smaller 20-acre sites or 2 megawatt sites, that the assessed value of the land would be assessed at commercial rates versus the larger. And I think there were some comments at one of our study sessions that this is kind of a better deal, keeping the land assessed at an agricultural assessed value versus commercial. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm asking a lot of questions because these are very large facilities, and it's new coming into Arapahoe County. And I am looking for the long term, what's best for Arapahoe County in the long term. And just as I would any other, we spent 2 years on oil and gas to make sure that we had really understood the implications of oil and gas drilling in Arapahoe County. I don't feel like that we've had that proper amount of time. I feel not had the amount of time to really discuss all of those things with respect to solar. So that's what I'm trying to figure out by my questions.
Sure. I'd be happy to address that to the best of my ability, because once you get over 2 megawatts, the state kicks in. Division of Property Taxation kicks in and sets out new rules for us to follow. And given that, we pretty much lose control of it at that point. And so the state takes over and dictates to us how we operate, which is similar to other programs. It's not unusual to solar. In terms of comparison, it's a little hard to compare those apples and oranges, because even though it would be vacant land with a 29% assessment ratio, it would be 4 times. Ag is also a 29% assessment ratio, but the value would increase significantly. But initially, probably not enough to offset the improvement value we're going to get out of the state assessed. So there's a net gain, I suspect. For us to truly run that analysis would take our staff a week or so to run through all those numbers. And even then, it'd be a hypothetical we really could never get to, because the state wouldn't let us do it. So your question is a good point, because if we look 20 years into the future or 40 years into the future, land values could be off the charts. You just don't know. And what is today is rural could be surrounded in urban at that point in time. And so there's no way to tell. The decision today, based on current situation, seems reasonable. Like I was telling Karen earlier, we're going to be a lot smarter once they build 1 or 2 of these, and we can analyze them. And the same is true with property value impacts. We doubt seriously if it's 0. Could be positive, could be negative, but I haven't seen the appraisal they produced. I assume it says there's not enough data to measure it, or it's not identifiable yet, and it may be someday. The market hasn't given an opinion on that. So from a property tax standpoint, it is tough to make that call, because you lock it in for a very long period of time. And I certainly appreciate that and understand it. But based on what we can do today, our office has very little control over what we can do with that.
Okay. Commissioner Holden.
Thank you.
Just to clarify that point, what you're saying is that the state really controls how the assessed valuation is used. in terms of in terms of the agricultural land? Would it require? Could we, as a county, change the zoning of that land to commercial? And you're saying that we're restricted by state statute?
Well, there are two statutes that control this, and neither one of them controls zoning. You could rezone it commercial today, but it would not affect our classification as agricultural.
That was my point, is that we really don't have any control over how that land is assessed because of the state statute.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Conti.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and this is a huge learning curve for all of us. As Nancy commented, that we are learning as we're going here in this. As I know, probably folks in your office feel similar. But after talking with a few of my friends, at recent CCI events, Colorado counties, where commissioners come literally from all over the state, and I was talking with them about this. Some things were becoming fairly apparent, and while we don't have any control because it is going to produce over the 2 megawatts of power, what we would have control and ability to do is to dictate what types of projects could be included in agriculturally zoned land. Is that correct?
Commissioner, I don't know. I'd have to refer that to county attorney's office. Again, the assessor's office does not rely heavily on zoning. We rely on use. So the zoning may change and it may make no difference to us. Could you do it? Very possible. I don't know. And there'd be a legal requirement that would set in, and whether it's planning or legal. So I really couldn't tell you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Hill?
Well, generally and typically the value is based on the use. So, but for the state statute which says that the classification retains the prior classification, this change of use would change that land value. So really, is the board directly affecting what those uses are? Sure, there's different policies encouraging development or not that the county can do, but for the large measure of it, I think it's going to be the market's going to decide what the use will be for a particular piece of property. How it develops and the way it develops will control what the tax revenue results from that. With these, again, but for the fact of the state policy is expressed by statute, the use taking the property out of agricultural production would change that classification or its entitlement to the agricultural classification. So, but there's a state statute which trumps that.
And if I may, just to clarify that one thing, Bob, the land, since it has agricultural classification, continues to be valued as if it were being farmed. So it has certain soil types, certain yields, certain crop, certain commodity prices, certain expenses capitalized into a value. So we continue to do that. I will tell you, though, that in the number crunching that Karen and her staff went through, the land value portion, the tax attributable to the land value portion in agricultural use is about $3,500 a year. So for the entire ownership, the remaining $375,000 is improvements. So it's fairly significant in that term.
Questions? Karen Hart,
Karen, did you have
anything else you'd like to add?
You want to add to that? I know you've been in touch with Cypress a lot.
I would just say when we were looking at the difference between commercial land versus agricultural land in the project and what those tax differences were. It's about 10 times more if it were on as commercial land right now. However, that number is going from $3,500 to $35,000, or $35,000. But you're still adding over $350 or more $1,000 in the improvements. So even though that there's that loss in what we would normally be classifying and collecting on the land, it's a lot more income coming in to all the entities by having the solar site there with the improvements.
Commissioner Conti.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today to help us really dig down a little deeper and understand this. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're looking at here when you're talking about the improvements, what we're looking at here is really what's considered personal property taxes, and that's on the actual equipment. Is that correct?
That's all part of the formula that the state division uses, and they look back at it's a complicated worksheet, and it goes into the amount of generation there is and price points and all of that. But included in that is the hundreds of thousands of panels that would be going in.
Correct, and that is all part of that personal property tax formula?
Yeah, we call it state assessed, and that includes personal property and anything that Cypress owns.
Okay.
There won't be a separate personal property tax in addition to this. It's all inclusive.
Any other questions for our assessor's office? Thank you very much. If I could have Michelle Zimmerman come forward again from Cypress Creek. I forgot to ask one question of you that I wanted to ask, and that's concerns the 500-foot setback on the north that you kind of worked out and negotiated with the neighbors that would have been closest to the northern boundary. Excuse me, fire drill.
And just as a quick point of clarification too, for the underlying taxes, the real property taxes, Hunter Solar is responsible for paying those taxes since we're leasing that land. That doesn't fall on the landowner.
Very good point. And then we talked a little bit about you're working with ConocoPhillips and Anadarko to decide where their site location would be. Depending on that negotiation with ConocoPhillips and Anadarko, is that 500-foot setback, is that written in stone more or less, or is that something that you would feel comfortable maybe taking it to 400 feet or 300 feet, depending upon your loss of PV cells or PV panels, if Conoco says we need an acre here or an acre there or whatever it is that they...
That's a great question. Essentially saying if we lose X number of megawatts because oil and gas development, would we try to make that back up on the north end? And
correct.
No, I personally don't feel comfortable. I won't speak for them, but I don't think the neighbors would feel comfortable at less than 500-foot setback. I really don't. I wouldn't want to. If anything, we would find a way to shorten the distance between the rows to still get to 75 megawatts, or we would just do a 72 megawatt project or something like that. But I wouldn't feel comfortable reducing that northern setback personally.
Okay. And I was just looking through the conditions of approval, all 16 of them. You've seen those.
And I want to commend Arapahoe County. There's not, as you probably know, not every county takes a lot of the referral agency recommendations into consideration and includes them in conditions of approval. And I really want to commend Arapahoe County because I think it's important. Why have our referral agencies out there taking the time out of their busy days to make these recommendations if we're not going to heed their advice? So,
well, I wish all of our applicants were as praiseworthy or give us praise for all the conditions of approval we put on them. But in this case, and one more question, then we'll get to Commissioner Conti. We have an MOU, and maybe I should have asked this of Diane Kosis, but has that MOU with Cypress Creek Hunter Solar, has that been completed?
That only applies to the 20 or 2 megawatt or less.
Okay.
Where we have
That's where our MOU comes in.
solar gardens.
Thank you. Commissioner Conti.
Yes. Again, conversations with other commissioners in other parts of the state who are dealing with similar projects that are coming on and have come on. Is there any plan for potential and increased rodent population, specifically prairie dogs, rats? We are seeing further infestation of these in many areas, and I am being told from our fellow county commissioners in other parts of the state that these fenced-in parameters make for just a wonderful, safe habitat for them to be, not be preyed upon. That's exactly correct. And I just wonder, is there any kind of plan to mitigate anything like that? Because unfortunately, we may see them up here, but they have the ability to burrow down and then go into other populations. Yes.
Prairie dogs are amazing. I'll take a stab at it, but then I'd ask that maybe Colorado Parks and Wildlife help me out. I know that there have been situations in the past where we think, and I'm not saying cypress, I'm saying the solar industry in general think, oh, we just plug it in and it goes. The sun makes it sun shines and we make electricity and we're done. And that's something Cypress Creek Renewables being, we only started in 2014 because we brought all of this magnitude of solar experience. That was one of the key, our operations and maintenance group is probably one of our largest verticals in the company, and we take a very high regard to maintaining our properties, making sure our systems produce, making sure that all of the commitments we made we uphold. So if there's a way we can manage against that, that's something that we're going to do. But specifically, whether or not these are a nurturing ground for prairie dogs, I would ask maybe Colorado Parks and Wildlife to help me out on that.
Okay, thank you. In fact, that's who we'll call up next, unless there are any other questions. Commissioner Sharp.
I just had one of the conditions in here is a performance bond, because I think that this is a lot of equipment, a lot of panels and that kind of thing. And you mentioned decommissioning. So I guess my question is, do you have any other, one question, do you have any other sites that are this large that Cypress Creek has managed a project like this before?
Yes, not in Colorado.
Okay.
Our largest site is, I think, 150 megawatts, somewhere around there. It's about twice this size. We have a number in this range because there's a majority of our projects are right around 80 megawatts or less.
Okay. And in terms of I think technology changes so quickly in today's environment. And so can you talk about, I think that's one of the things that I want to make sure of, that no matter who is, whether it's Hunter Solar or Cypress Renewables, that if the technology changes to a smaller footprint or whatever, that I don't want the county to be responsible in any way for removing any of the solar panels or anything that's out there, or in any way decommissioning. And I think that's why we've got a performance bond in here. And are you in agreement with that? And maybe, because this is 20-year, 40-year, I can't even think that far.
Probably going to be doing it, yeah.
I mean, I think in 20 years things are going to be totally different.
We have two, we agree, and the county nor the landowner should be responsible for decommissioning, and that's why it's a very strong component of our lease. Our landowners had a lot of questions about that, and we made sure we got all of our landowners comfortable that our lease terms on the decommissioning are very clear, that it is the responsibility of Hunter Solar, who is the entity getting the money for the power that's produced, so has the ability to do so, to make sure that entire, at the end of the term of the lease, whether it's the end of 20 years or 35 years or 40 years, or for whatever reason, if that footprint does get reduced, if a portion of that, anything happens, that any decommissioning has to occur, it is the responsibility of Hunter Solar.
One last question for me. I keep remembering all these things, and I think I'm fairly satisfied from reading the information that you provided. But I know a lot of people have talked about glare, and because this is right along Quincy, and there's some traffic on Quincy, not as much maybe on Brick Center, but some on Brick Center as well. Can you talk a little bit about how these panels are designed? And previous experience with glare.
I actually have a backup slide on glare, if I can get to it. So, of course, there's an anti-reflective coating on all of these panels because the goal, not to be silly, but is to reflect or absorb as much light as we can now. Just like the windshield on your car, there's glass, whether it's tempered or anti-reflective, there may be some glare qualities. However, the way that the solar panels are situated, the angles actually send most of the reflection back up. And then even with that, we have a lot of projects that you've seen at DIA right within FAA regulations. And so the glare has not shown to have an impact from an FAA perspective. We do actually, every single project has to have an FAA at least review, and then if it's deemed necessary, we do a filing just to make sure that it's not going to have some perfect alignment where it's going to have a reflection issue. But no, in these situations, as you can see in the winter, it's a little bit, you're probably used to seeing that in the winter, a little bit more of a broader spectrum of reflectivity, and then in the summer, it's a little bit more narrow. But the reflection would be cast upward, back up in the direction that it came from.
Thank you.
And one point of clarification that my public affairs team would have my hide if I didn't attempt to make is when we talked about the solar tariff, and I mentioned how we would be recovering, the solar industry will be able to recover because those manufacturers will find other ways to produce without being tariffed. And a lot of those manufacturers are coming to the U.S. I think I mentioned Canada and Mexico, and I didn't mention the U.S., so I know my public affairs team would be very upset if I didn't mention, because of course, the purpose of the proponents of the tariff were because we didn't have enough U.S.-based manufacturing. So this is, of course, a way to promote more U.S.-based manufacturing of solar panels as well. And with the demand of it, I think that they'll tool up pretty quick. So I think within a year or two, any delay we see in projects from not having solar panels here on U.S. soil or close by, we'll be able to catch up within a year or two.
Commissioner Sharp.
Thank you.
One question, and we're going to hear from residents out in the area, is because it is a plains area, the visual impact. And so I am interested in hearing from the people out in that area what their concerns or no concerns on visual impacts, not just distance from property lines.
Yeah. We spoke yesterday just I know a lot of things happen right before or between the time that you guys get all of your information and we're standing here before you. And in conversations, continuing conversation, of course, with Parks and Wildlife and with the neighbors, if we don't do privacy slats because that's more difficult for the wildlife, could we maybe do a berm or trees out in that area? I'm not sure that we could do it without having a water source, but maybe we could do some kind of a berm with a low growth vegetation. But there's some things I think we want to continue to discuss. And so if we can have the room to be able to come up with the best answer for the neighbors and for Parks and Wildlife, then I think we can accomplish that.
And I apologize, I did not have my mic on, but my question was about visual impacts. I think it seems to me there are a couple of things that we don't have kind of nailed down quite yet. And so I guess, I think that would be a question for our staff with regards to some of the mineral rights and a couple of the other things. And I would like to hear from the Parks and Wildlife, folks. But I just want to make sure that we've got, when we get after we hear all the public comment, that we do have everything in here that has to be considered with respect to this application
I think that's
before we actually vote on it. So
I think that's the conditions of approval we mentioned. I think that's
because there are a couple of things that I'm hearing that aren't quite resolved yet.
Yeah, the privacy fence or the privacy slats versus like earthen berm.
Yeah, and the mineral rights and some things like that I think are important to.
And I think those are in conditions of approval. I think those come along as conditions of approval.
Okay.
I don't have them memorized, but yeah, I think those certainly can and should be in there.
Okay.
Thank you. I will ask for Travis Harris from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife to come forward. He's becoming a regular at our public hearings. We appreciate it, Travis. And just if you'd state your name and department.
Thank you. I'm Travis Harris with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I'm the District Wildlife Manager in Eastern Arapahoe County. And also here today is Brandon Moret. He is our Regional Energy Liaison. So I have the narrow view of Arapahoe County, and he brings the more broad regional view. So if you have questions.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. We recently met, several of us from CPW, with the applicant's representative, and would like to just start out by saying thank you to the applicant for being willing to adapt, I guess. We really feel like this is also, as you guys feel, this is new, this is very large, and I can't stand here and claim to know all the impacts potentially to wildlife. With miles of chain link fence that is impenetrable to many species of wildlife, it's going to be, I guess, a learning experience for all of us as well. But the biggest concern with the fragmentation, we're grateful to see the applicant include wildlife corridors. Several wildlife corridors, as we've seen. Just know that species of wildlife like deer, coyote, fox, there are many species that will most likely use those. But as just the way things go, there's always the opposite. Pronghorn, a species that depends completely on visibility at distance to see predators, to see escape routes. They do not tolerate development like many other species of wildlife. They may not use the corridors, and they may abandon altogether. Pronghorn are a very wild species that do not adapt like deer when they're coming and eating your roses in your garden. We're very pleased to hear about the potential for some more wildlife-friendly fencing. That's very good news for Colorado Parks and Wildlife and for the wildlife out there. With regards to the privacy slats, my concern was, has been mentioned, the potential for creating a snow fence. If you've seen the winds in eastern Colorado and the snow, what we don't want is have an enormous barrier of snow build up, which could potentially impact wildlife, especially pronghorn that time of the year when they concentrate during the winter. So by removing the slats, seems like a winner. You save money and potentially use some other visual barriers, as was mentioned, with perhaps vegetation, which isn't always possible because even though they're drought-resistant species of shrub and tree, that first year is critical, and they take so much water for those root systems to establish. So potentially an earthen barrier, or earthen berm, I should say, which may give the local neighbors what they want. There's your visual buffer, but also the chain link fence is kept open for the wind and the visual and also appease the National Electric Code. So you've got your fence and the barrier. Just a suggestion. Commissioner Baker, you talked about what happens if a deer or a pronghorn or something should get caught in there in one of these large facilities. As you see sometimes on the side of the freeway, one of the potentials we visited with is the jump outs. It's essentially an earthen ramp where if an animal gets trapped, it can get out as a possibility. Commissioner Conte, you asked about the rodents, and in particular prairie dogs. There's probably not a more controversial animal on the planet. My concern from CPW for wildlife ties in with that. When we take and put solar panels or anything on the ground, there's habitat loss. There will be species that continue to thrive and flourish, small mammals, nesting birds, prairie dogs, right? Rabbits, that type of thing. The concern is the negative potential for strikes with or impacts with birds of prey, our raptor species that hunt over large tracts of land. They lose the foraging grounds. When they try to perhaps grab a rabbit or a prairie dog, there could be a collision with the panels coming in or that bird of prey on the way out. Eagles, hawks, owls, falcons, all are birds of prey. So that's definitely a concern. We would recommend, and it looks like it's part of the conditions of approval, burrowing owl surveys be conducted during that breeding season. I would say, looking at these conditions of approval, we can support the conditions of approval that relate to wildlife. This is a good thing. We have wildlife in mind. Just know our agency is sometimes criticized for only caring about big game, the species that can be hunted. The fact of the matter is, big game, small game, or non-game, you can't focus on one without impacting the other. We are about contiguous tracts of habitat, of natural lands. It's all about habitat connectivity. And the habitat needs of all wildlife are interconnected. So to stand here and just talk about pronghorn or just talk about this or that, it's the big picture. In some circumstances, we recognize that there may be nothing that the applicant can do, for example, with regards to the pronghorn. I guess that's everything I have. Thank you for hearing me, and if you have any questions, or for our regional energy liaison.
Questions for Mr. Harris? Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And excuse me, I think we're all on the brink of colds or getting over them or something. But anyway, with the corridors, that's really interesting to me. How wide do those need to be really useful? I can't imagine a narrow corridor being very helpful at all. So it would have to have some width. And do you have experience with that? And do the corridors here, it sounds like you're comfortable with it, the corridors that are established here, do those suit what you think the wildlife will require so that they're comfortable enough to come and go? And
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Always excellent questions. I do not know the answer to the width. We've talked about this at length. What will a pronghorn pass through or not? A lot of it is going to be determined, are they linear? Is there a dog leg in there we're going to trap wildlife and kill them? What about, is it wintertime when the snow is flying, or is this summer? Is it the fawning season? Are they broken apart in October when the bucks are running the does, or are we talking 100, 200, 300 head, especially with pronghorn? It's a tough thing to say. I don't know. I can't say this is the correct width. However, any wildlife corridors is a win. Is better than just a contiguous block of panels. So I guess we'll just be learning right along with everyone else on that. It's really going to be an eye-opener. I don't know. That's why I say there is the potential for pronghorn to simply abandon. We've all seen areas where pronghorn once were, and now they no longer are.
Any other questions for Mr. Harris? Or for... I'm sorry, your
Brandon Moret, our Regional Energy Liaison.
Regional Energy Liaison. Okay, no questions, right?
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for staff before I open it up for public comment? Commissioner Sharp.
And these are really about some of the maintenance of the property, noxious weeds, and things like that. Are those all, I'm not sure who's the right person, probably not sure, Diane, you're the right person on noxious weeds.
Ms. Kosis.
But how are those, what are the requirements there, and is that's part of, I was looking to see if there's
part of their application,
anything in here.
A weed management plan. And it's been reviewed by our weed control specialist in the planning division.
Okay.
Questions? Commissioner Conti.
Yes, if I could ask someone from the assessor's office back up. I just had your final comment, Karen, caused my wheels to keep spinning, and I just had another question that I wanted to get answered before we move into public testimony.
Karen Hart from the assessor's office.
Thank you. Welcome. My question was, you commented in kind of one of your closing comments before you left the podium there that if it had been, the difference between agricultural use and industrial use was about 10 times. Is that correct? About 3,500 versus 35,000?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, would that be on top of then the numbers that we had previously seen on that screen? Because that was largely based, as I was thinking I was getting, from personal property tax, which is the equipment and the stuff that's on top of the land. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then on top of that would have been the increase then in simply the land use. Is that correct?
Well, in my estimate, I included the land taxes, and so I came up with a little bit more than what she has on there. But we have the $3,500 of actual collection of taxes already in that total. And so if it had been on as commercial for this year, for instance, we would have added about $30,000 to the totals that you saw on that screen. That's what the difference would be today.
Okay. So clarification. So, but for the state statute that puts this into the control of the state to determine the use as opposed to the county. If it were county, if it were in our purview, it would go to industrial use, and we would see probably an additional $30,000 per year in income. Is that correct?
We would be classifying it as commercial land, and yes, it would add about $30,000 at today's value on non-agricultural land in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the assessor's office before they sit down? Thank you very much. I'm going to be opening the public hearing portion of this. I have a list of people who have signed up to speak or who signed up either for or against. Actually, everyone on this list that I have signed up to speak in favor of this proposal. I'll be going through this. If you do want to speak, we'd ask you to come down and be mindful that you do have to speak into the microphone. Each person will be given 3 minutes. We have some lights here at the front of the podium, a yellow one that will come on when you have 30 seconds left, and the red one, which means your 3 minutes is up, and we'll ask you to wrap up at that time. Everyone who comes forward to speak will have to, we're going to ask them to give us their name and address for the record. And so I'll go through all the names, whether you signed up to speak or not, just to verify if you still want to speak or if you've changed your mind. So the first one on the list is Mr. George Hyatt. If you'd like to come forward. Nope. Or speak or not. It's your choice. Come on down, please. And Mr. Hyatt, if you'd state your name and address, and I believe you're one of the property owners that's involved in this, so I just ask you to confirm whether that's true or not.
Yeah, that's right. My name is George Hyatt, property owner. We're in a lease agreement with the Cypress. So
your address?
I live in Aurora, 6067 South Walding Court, Aurora, Colorado.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. There were a lot of things I was going to say in favor of the solar farm. I think Michelle did a really good job. It's, I would just echo everything she said. Just maybe reiterate, it does seem to be a confluence of, 4 landowners. The scale of the size of the project may forego multiple smaller projects down the road. The confluence of the size of the substation and the transmission lines could have a minimal impact, and future possible sites may have more dense residential housing to contend with. So I think there's an opportunity to get that solar energy inside of Arapahoe County with, those tailwinds working for us. Let's see. That's really, what I wanted to say in addition to what Michelle had said. I thought she did a really good job. But I want to add that, worked with Cypress now for probably over a year and a half. And I have really found them to be very sincere and genuine in trying to really accommodate, the landowners, the neighbors, the county, Parks and Wildlife. So I continue to be impressed, and I have a lot of great trust in them.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Okay.
Anything else?
No. Did y'all have any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. Hyatt? I don't see any. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
The next one on my list is Brenda Toft. Did not want to speak, but is in favor. Is that still correct? Okay. Duke Toft? Dale Toft did not want to speak and is in favor. Mark Moore wanted to speak and is in favor. Mark Moore, please come forward. And again, if you'll state your name and address for the record and watch the lights for your 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. My name is Mark Moore. Address is 46700 East Quincy Avenue. My wife Brenda and I own the Kiowa Creek Sporting Club, which is just adjacent to the project eastern boundary. Pretty much the entire eastern boundary of the project perimeter is our land. And we've been out there for almost 22 years. We own the business there. We live there. We come and go. Our kids have grown up out there. I know a lot of folks in the Bennett area, of course. And we love living out there. We make a living doing it. My oldest daughter and her husband, and now our grandson live there with us as well. And we all make a living there on our property. We enjoy that opportunity that, kind of the American dream in our eyes. And, this solar project is just another, diversification of our efforts to continue that lifestyle. We love living out in the Eastern Plains. I totally understand everyone's, concerns that have been expressed in the past hearings and so forth about the views and the peace and the quiet and just the rural environment. And we enjoy that as well, absolutely. I feel like these solar panels, as you could see from some of the simulated views that Michelle offered, I think they're going to be a very minimal impact on the overall viewscape out there. Certainly they're more noticeable in some areas than others. But we come and go on Quincy and travel around on Brick Center quite often ourselves. And our customers, of course, come to our business on those same routes. And I really don't see any impact to us in those regards. We've actually just started branching out to do weddings on our facility as well. And so this was a concern that we had with regards to things like that, folks that are coming out for a beautiful wedding. And we're comfortable with the potential there and any concerns there. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any questions? Thank you. Brenda Moore? And name and address, please.
My name is Brenda Moore, and I also live at 46700 East. I live at East County Road 30, not Quincy. According to the post office. A couple of points I wanted to make just very quickly. About 10 and a half years ago now, we built our dream home on our property there. And my home faces west. We look directly at the water tower for the Roads and Bridges facility, which was actually installed after we built our house there. And my point with that is, that's not the greatest thing to look at, but I'm not mad at it, so I don't really see it. And with that intersection, we've got the Roads and Bridges facility, we've got the substation, we've got the high voltage power lines, we've got Kiowa Creek Sporting Club. It's about as industrial as you get in eastern Arapahoe County. So I guess my point is there's not really a better place in the county, in my opinion, to put solar. It seems very conducive to the things that are already happening at that intersection. From a homeowner's point of view and the view point of view, when this all came up, I'm like, oh God, I don't really want to look at those panels out of my, nice house on the plains with, expansive views. So I had Mark take me north of Bennett where there are some big solar fields, and I was expecting it to be something that was quite noticeable, and I was pleasantly surprised that it was pretty unobtrusive, really. It's one of those things that's kind of low on profile, and I think in time you wouldn't even notice it was there. I felt like the renderings that Michelle brought were pretty accurate to what I saw in reality when I went and toured other fields in the county, or in Adams County in that case. So I guess I would say because of those things, I found myself feeling like, okay, I can live with this, and I think we probably won't even notice it in a year or so after its construction. So, thank you. Any questions
from Commissioner Conn?
Just curious, do you notice right now any pronghorn or deer going across your property? And if those were to disappear, would that bother you?
We have antelope from time to time, not a lot in our area, honestly. We typically see those further west, kind of out in the ConocoPhillips area, and just probably 3 to 5 miles west of us is where we really see the big herds of the pronghorn. With regards to deer, they're everywhere. We see them all the time. And I will tell you that 23 years ago, when we stood here and rezoned our property to allow for Kiowa Creek Sporting Club, there were two big arguments: what it's going to do to property values and what it's going to do to the wildlife. And I can tell you now, in hindsight, we have more wildlife on our property now than we ever did 23 years ago, when it just was really vacant property, had a few trailer houses on it. We cleared the fences and cleared the extra buildings off, and the deer, the birds, we have the coyotes, we have everything, and in abundance, even though we're shooting 6 days a week. So they adapt, and they are totally fine and thriving, I would say. And with regards to property values, they've about quadrupled since we went in there. So I wouldn't expect any difference. I don't see the solar really having any more impact on property values than the substation did, and that the County Roads and Bridges facility being right there does. In my opinion, as a homeowner, I like having the Roads and Bridges facility there because my snow gets cleared. I can get in and out. It's an advantage. It's all in how you look at it, and it's all in what someone will pay. And we certainly have not seen any. We've seen significant increases in value and significant increases in wildlife with what we do with shooting and noise and all that stuff. So I don't think this is going to harm any of that.
Well, certainly stay warm. I understand that there's some snow coming your way in the next 24 hours. So thank you for being here, and thank you for answering the question.
Thank you, Mrs. Moore. Next person on the list was Larry Toft, who did not want to speak but was for the project. Come forward, please, Mr. Toft. Welcome, and if you'll state your name and address into the microphone for the record, and be mindful of the lights at the front.
Anyway, I'm Larry Toft, and I live in 51300 East 56th Avenue in Bennett, Colorado. There's a lady here that probably knows more about Brick Center Road than anyone else in this room. That young lady grew up, and she's the last person that went to the school at Brick Center School in the 7th grade, the only child. Anyway, she knows more about Brick Center than anybody in here. I married her 64 years ago. Glad I did. Anyway, we are for this thing, so I want you to consider that. Consider the people that it will help. There's not a person that's going to hurt. So hang in there. Vote tough. Vote right. Talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toft. Ellen Toft did not want to speak, but is in favor of this. Okay. Did not want to speak, but was in favor is Brent Bridle? Igley? Yes, did not want to speak? Okay. Also in favor of this, but did not want to speak, was Trevor Crow. Thank you. Did not want to speak, but was in favor, Pat Kelly. Wanted to speak, Kent Bridle. Sorry. Brent or Kent? Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
Just curious of the people who didn't want to speak, are these neighbors or people who are right in the area of this development?
Some people have Englewood addresses, some people have Denver addresses, some people have Greeley addresses.
Okay.
So, I may own land in the area, but I don't know that maybe
not living there.
Correct.
I just like a clarification that these are individuals who may own land or may have a perspective but don't actually physically live there.
I think we can assume that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kent, and could you state your name?
My name is Kent Bikely. I live at 7475 South County Road 145, Bennett. And my brother and I own 160 acres on the northwest corner of Quincy and Brick Center as part of this project. And my family has farmed that since 1960. Now I still farm it, and for this project is because, over the years being in agriculture, this is only 10% of our farmland. We're further east in the county. We've always got other income through either lease rights, oil rights, pipelines to support farm income because farm income is very volatile. And that's one reason for this project, income is every year. And even at this place, we got road rights on each side that we got money from. So that's one reason I supported for it. And the question is it going to take land out of agriculture? Some of the money that I got from an oil lease on this property, I went 3 miles east and bought 480 acres. So that was my goal with this thing is I'll expand my farm operation and keep land in agriculture instead of it being built for houses. And as far as the wildlife concerned, this area, I have two other locations of properties. The one's 480 acres, the other is 960. And the pronghorns there's 200 or 300, like I said, 300 in a herd at the other properties, not at this property. It's because of the other properties do not have houses around them. That's probably more of a detriment to pronghorn than as much as this project will be, as far as my opinion. And maybe I can answer Commissioner Jackson's question on the oil. Nowadays out there, just because I've signed lease oils and stuff, they usually, with the horizontal drilling, drill on a section of ground, which is 640 acres. They can go a mile. And sometimes they do it in the corner, so they can do like 4 different. Well, in this project, there's 4 different landowners. Not any one of the landowners is the whole section. So the oil company has more of the section to drill on than just where the solar project is at. Thanks for your time.
I do have a question for you because you farmed this land.
Yeah.
What do you think the effect on the land, on the soil, will be after being dormant, not being actively grown for 20 years, and then again if it is kept for 40 years?
It will be better for farming after 20 years because there'll be grasses and such, and we won't be taking nutrients out of the soil. That's why they do no-till, is to keep some of the nutrients in nowadays. I mean, they use a lot of chemicals nowadays. I'm not a big fan of all the chemicals, but that's the way the world is today. So,
thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Eichel? That was all I had on the list. Are there any other members of the community that would like to be? I see two. Come on forward one at a time, if you would. And ladies first, I assume. And if you'd state your name and address for the record.
I'm Yvette Kalishaw. I live at 3719 South County Road, Winchway 9. So I'm your neighbor to the north that you're looking for questions from. And that's my husband. He'll talk also.
What was your last name again?
Kalishaw, Cowlishaw.
Thank you.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Nancy Sharp for being so aware of the views and stuff. That has been a major concern. Cypress Creek has been very attentive. We're one of the two neighbors that came out and walked it with. You saw a picture from our property of where those would go. We're very comfortable at the 500 foot. Coming back much further would be a little bit of a concern. One of our main concerns is the deer and pronghorn. They are very active and frequent in that particular field that's right there. We see them all the time. They do come, and I'm not sure if it's deer or pronghorn, apparently not pronghorn, probably because of his things, but they do come onto our properties and go over and under our fences on our properties there also. So they do come back in a little bit on the downhill parts of the properties where there aren't the buildings. But we do, have a concern for that. We also do have the concern for the views. So in our opinion, we would be with the wildlife at not wanting panels in the fencing. We can see Pikes Peak from our properties. If they're that 500 foot, we don't lose that view of Pikes Peak if there's no panels. We also have that concern for the snow. Snow is crazy insane out there. If they were going to be any closer than that 500 foot, we wouldn't get in and out of our driveways because of the snow. With those panels, we would prefer to have the blow through to stop the snow in our space and blowing up against our houses. And we literally will be able to see this whole thing from our front house. All 500 whatever acres are visible from our home. So we would definitely not want to see just the snow. It would be problematic in many ways for us and the wildlife. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. And, sir? Okay. Are there any other citizens that would like to speak on this matter? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the commissioners if there's any discussion, any concerns. Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, I just want to add that in the BSR there was a report, I don't know if it was from the FAA or something about the glare, and it showed that at certain times there might be some moderate, but that it was not problematic kind of glare. So I was pleased to see that, and I am also really pleased at the thoroughness of the report and the and the preparation. So I can't think of any other questions I have because I think most of them were answered in the BSR and in the presentations.
Commissioner Conti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concerns continue to be the fact that we've got over 550 acres being consumed for industrial use, yet we, because do not have the authority, are losing $30,000 per year over the life of that project, which turns into $1.2 million in revenue for the county. Doing my simple mathematics here, and with the growing needs that we have for aging infrastructure, well, let's just say the list of capital needs never ceases to diminish.
Any Commissioner Sharp?
I think it's covered in here, but on the fencing on 8, and maybe Ms. Kosas, if you can make sure it says applicant shall work with adjacent property owners to mitigate visual impacts through setbacks, fencing. I guess I would like to have it more definitive rather than just work with. And I'm, to make sure that we don't have slats in the fencing? Because I'm hearing that's very important to these individuals, to the property owners to the north, so, and wildlife and other things. So my question is, should that be changed to
Diane, would you
prohibit?
come forward and maybe...
Yeah, the visual mitigation is to a large extent still a moving target. And I do feel confident that Cypress Creek Renewables will continue to work with the county and the neighbors and Colorado Parks and Wildlife to get the absolute correct kind of fencing, and also to that we are not going to hold their feet to the fire for the privacy slats in the fencing, now that we've heard from Colorado Parks and Wildlife that could be a detriment.
Okay. I guess maybe my question is for Ms. Zimmerman then, is the wording in here with respect to, I'm uncomfortable with leaving this sort of as a moving target, because we have people who have a concern and we have wildlife concerns. So what kind of wording could we put in here that would assure these landowners that we're not going to have this privacy fencing? And I understand, you've got to make sure that you have the proper amount of fencing around this area. I understand that. My concern is really the privacy.
Those privacy slats, those
yes.
vinyl or wood, whatever they are. The only reason I don't want to prohibit it is because of two reasons, sorry. One, when I met with the facilities folks at the Eastern Arapahoe Center there, they had talked about the desire to have a little bit of snow fencing, and that by having privacy slats on just that southern fence along Quincy, so it would be on the north side of Quincy or County Road 30, that might actually benefit their work, because apparently there are times that only one lane of Quincy is open because of the snow buildup. And then another one being, for example, as Mr. and Mrs. Moore discussed their home looking to the west, there may be places where privacy slats and a view shed mitigation might make sense. In that case, maybe an earthen berm might be able to take the place of privacy slats. I just am afraid if that is a beneficial thing to the county and wouldn't have an impact on neighbors. Of course, if you're going along Quincy, privacy slats won't have an impact on neighbors to the north. It would have an impact on people driving. But if it kept the snow off the road, maybe I'm trying to get too much out of one thing. But
and I understand that. I just want to make sure that it is, and maybe the way to say this is that an agreement needs to be reached between the county and neighbors. I mean, some of these may vary in what you do, but that you have to come to agreement with the proper fencing, because these individuals don't want to have the slats. Some individuals may, or you may want to have berms that work better. So I just want to make sure that that's not clear in here, that
we agree with that.
That it's important for Hunter Solar or Cypress Creek Renewables to come to an agreement that's acceptable to the adjacent landowner as to what's going to go in the fence. And I'm not exactly sure how we can.
Mr. Hill is working on some proposed changes to that I think will be acceptable to everyone. I did want to just give commissioners a chance to talk about the property value report. We haven't, I don't believe, been given it. And Diane, can you confirm that you've received that, or was it included in our packet?
I sent it pretty late last night.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I want to make sure it was something, because sometimes we read every word and then other times we may kind of scan. I did not see a property value report in here. Is there a condition that specifically addresses anything? I assume not. We can't make a condition that property values will increase. I wish we could. That would be great if we could dictate that from this dais, but I don't think we can do that. But that is something that I think I would like to review as well.
And the company, the folks that did that report are here in the audience if there are any general questions.
Is there anybody that would like to hear from the people that did the property value report, what the general findings were?
I guess I'd just be interested, Mr. Chairman, I would just be interested in knowing what areas they did this in, because if it's in Weld County or someplace in North Carolina, that's really different than Eastern Arapahoe County.
Can we have...
I'm not sending that earlier, that report.
That's okay. But you do have the individuals or the company that did that. Could they come forward and...
Yeah, run through.
Thank you. Appreciate it if you'd state your name and address for the record.
Sure. I'm Ron Throop. I'm the managing partner of American Valuation Partners. I live at 944 Aztec Drive, Castle Rock, Colorado, 80108.
Thank you. The question has to do with your methodology as far as what other locations you did comparisons.
Right. So as someone alluded to earlier, this is a new industry as far as measuring effects that may happen. So one of the predominant things we would do is look at other case studies, regardless of where they are at this point, to see what analogous case studies to see what is going on. So somebody referred to maybe North Carolina or other places. In those areas, there was what we'd call paired sales, or some data to compare with and without visual impacts to see what kind of visual impacts may happen. Right, so those are addressed or acknowledged in a report. Those particular ones were actually subdivisions or backsides of subdivisions, which aren't really necessarily the same scenario we have here, where we have predominantly agricultural and scattered residential, not near each other. Okay. The other thing we would look at, and you could look at our AVP website. We're nationally known for looking at damaged properties, detrimental conditions. So we look at the paradigm of different visual impacts that are also out there that have been studied through time. And for us, that would be considered things, some of them are at the site, high-power transmission lines, you got substations, those have been studied. For instance, in the most recent Quarterly Journal of the Appraisal Institute, there's a 20-page article summarizing the effects of high-tension power lines on property values. You'll notice in there that there's an array of possibilities, but the general number would be around 1-2% negative. Granted, studies that have nothing, studies that have a little bit positive, depending on how quality of the data that you have. We are also the published authors of the main piece that is used in drilling and hydrofracking. That was published in 2013 by myself, my daughter Shua Mao, and another researcher at Cleveland State. In that article, we looked at the distance and proximity to drilling sites versus property value differences and damages. Now, the difference there is drilling sites, as we might have here, are higher. So you have something that's more, I want to call it in your face, than you would have with a solar farm, which tends to be a uniform look, which actually takes away from the egregious look of a view as far as being a problem. In those studies, we find that the damages are limited to being a distance of a quarter mile and seeing it. So a quarter mile for us would be about 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet here. Now, but it's more egregious, has more height, so you can see it from that distance, where you don't see a solar farm from that distance. It blends into the horizon, right? So it's diminished. You don't need the same amount of distance. Also with those, you have more concerns or possibilities of other environmental hazards or things happening that you don't have with a solar farm. So when we look at these types of issues, you try to put it in a gradation of problems and where they would fall within, a damage or no damage scenario across those different intrusions, if you want to think of it, the value. For someone's back when they're asking about the setback in the 500 feet, you should go to COGA to confirm this, Colorado Oil and Gas. But the setback requirements were changed several years ago, and I believe it's 500 feet for residential, 1,000 for places of gathering. So they would be within the 500 either way. And you can take a look at that site. That site will confirm what I just said for you. So in this case, when we have solar farms that are distances of 500 and more, and in our report you'll see we measured every house distance on that site. So we looked at all the sites, all the possible places around those facilities that we're talking about here with Hunter. We see that there's no study, whether it's from solar farms or even from other like-kind negatives outside or potential negatives outside your property, that would tell you that there's going to be a property damage from these views. The solar farm, because it's very uniform, tends to blend into the horizon at distances that we're looking at for these farms that are in these places that are here. The only one that we were actually really more concerned with, and I asked Michelle about this, was the Moore's home, because I stood in Moore's driveway, and to make sure, because we do go to each place to make sure when we, even on grade, are we going to have visual impacts? Because you could be, in certain grade areas have more impact as you're in a hole than you would have in other spots. So we do look at every place to make sure we don't intrude on horizon or mountain views, whatever else would be considered an amenity historically in valuation.
Questions? Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that the level of questioning that we have here is a concern for our residents, for our citizens, for our landowners. Property rights is a big part of my wanting to become a commissioner and uphold those property rights. So the leases that property rights are negotiating with Cypress Creek or Hunter Solar are their responsibility to make sure that everything's included in there that they legally want to. I did want to say that I have a modified condition 8, condition number 8 that Mr. Hill rapidly put together. It basically reads as it does in our board summary report, and adds that there's no period at the end of effect, and then establish an agreement with adjacent property owners as to the style of fencing along those properties subject to electrical code requirements. And if there's any objection or discussion about that, I would make a motion at this point.
I think if that addresses, sounds like that would address the issues of the residents. I just want to make sure that style, Mr. Hill, would be address slats as well as berm or in front of a fence, or is that?
I kind of left it pretty general, but we
okay.
Make it a little more specific as to slats, berm.
Yeah, my main thing is I just want them to be working with the resident and coming with something that's agreeable. Okay. Okay.
Okay, with that, I'd like to make a motion. In the case of U17-005, Hunter Solar Use by Special Review, I have read the staff report, including all exhibits and attachments, and have listened to the applicant's presentation and any public comment as presented at the hearing, and hereby move to approve this application based on the findings in the staff report, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, the applicant makes any modifications to plans as requested by Public Works and Development Department prior to the signing of the Mylars and before any construction is started on the project. 2, the applicant shall address all Engineering Services Division comments, concerns, and requirements, including but not limited to GESCI, grading, erosion, sediment control, right-of-way, and street cut permits, a gravel roadway agreement, etc., or as identified in their reports prior to the start of construction. 3, the applicant shall provide for the removal of the solar power plant if and when the solar power plant has been abandoned and is no longer functional or operational for a period of more than 1 year through the use of a performance bond to Arapahoe County to be provided by the applicant before the project becomes operational, or through some other guarantee of removal of the equipment that is acceptable to the planning division manager. 4, the applicant shall meet all of the requirements stipulated by Bennett Watkins Fire Rescue. 5, this use by special review approval does not run with the land. The USR will end when the solar energy production from the site is abandoned for a period of 6 months or more, or on February 6th, 2058, whichever occurs first. 6, provided setbacks from external property lines are maintained around the outer perimeter of the property serving as a leasing site for the solar energy production facility. The solar panels and related equipment may be built up to and cross the 8 internal parcel lines of parcels number 034633596, 033700511, 034720731, 034829547, 034610332, 034262784, 034262792, and 034262806 for the period that the properties are in use as a solar energy production facility, as generally shown on the USR drawings. 7, zone district setbacks from the property lines of any of the 8 individual parcels identified in the above condition number 6 shall be maintained until such time, shall be maintained until such time that the solar energy facility development proceeds onto the adjoining parcel within the USR boundary, at which time the solar panels and related equipment may cross the internal property line between the affected parcels as provided in said condition number 6. Halfway through. Number 8, the applicant shall work with adjacent property owners to mitigate visual impacts through setbacks, fencing, vegetation, or other mutually acceptable means, while providing sufficient transparent fencing for wildlife migration and preventing a snow fence effect, and establish an agreement with the adjacent property owners as to the style of fencing along those properties, subject to electrical code requirements. Number 9, the applicant shall work with mineral rights owners to ensure that minerals underlying the project are accessible. 10, the applicant shall construct a perimeter fence in compliance with Colorado Parks and Wildlife recommendations. 11, the applicant shall conduct surveys for burrowing owls and tree, shrub, and ground nesting raptors and songbirds prior to construction. If nests are identified, a minimum of a 500-foot buffer will be maintained until the young are no longer dependent on the nest, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife is in agreement that construction can proceed without buffers. 12, the applicant shall perform an initial bird population survey prior to initial construction to establish a baseline of the number of bird species and their numbers. And thereafter, an annual bird mortality survey will be required for the first 3 years following initial construction activities. Project maintenance crews will collect, identify, photograph, and keep records of bird corpses. The data shall be provided to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife with a copy to the Planning Division Director so that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Planning Division can evaluate the impact of the project on area bird populations. 13. The applicant shall minimize the crossings of small drainages during construction, even if water is not present at the time of construction. If drainages need to be crossed, they shall be crossed perpendicular to minimize the increase in sediment load. 14. The applicant shall provide one or more wildlife corridors that will allow wildlife to migrate through the solar facility. The planned corridor or corridors will be submitted to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife for review. 15. The applicant shall notify adjacent property owners of construction schedules. And 16. The applicant shall meet all of the requirements stipulated by the Intermountain Rural Electric Association.
Second.
A motion made by Commissioner Baker and seconded by Commissioner Jackson. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Abstentions. And the motion passes unanimously. Are there any commissioner comments for this meeting? Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who came today. I just wanted to remind folks that February is Black History Month, and I just want to read a little short article from Time magazine just to kind of help us remember why we celebrate the month. So it was in 1964 when author James Baldwin reflected on the shortcomings of his education. When I was going to school, he said, I began to be bugged by the teaching of American history because it seemed that history had been taught without cognizance of my presence. Baldwin's thoughts echoed those of many before and after him. Half a century earlier, when Carter G. Woodson had the same frustration, he set the foundation for what would become today's National Black History Month, observed each February. In the early 20th century, while he earned a master's degree from the University of Chicago and a PhD from Harvard, both in history, Woodson witnessed how black people were underrepresented in the books and conversations that shaped the study of American history. According to the way many historians taught the nation's past, African Americans were barely a part of the story, a narrative that Woodson knew was not true. So in 1915, he and Jesse E. Moreland founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. The organization would promote studying black history as a discipline and celebrate the accomplishments of African Americans. If a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated, Woodson said of the need of such a study. I will just kind of skip around this, but they chose the second week in February as it encompassed both Frederick Douglass's birthday on February 14th and Abraham Lincoln's birthday on February 12th. And so this holiday spread very quickly, and let's see, a number of mayors had already adopted the celebration as a municipal event by the time President Gerald Ford decreed Black History Month a national observance in 1976 on the 50th anniversary of the first iteration in America's bicentennial year. I just read this because I think we're all really aware of our own personal histories, and I think it's something very important to all of us. And it is a time to celebrate all of us, but in particular to remember the contributions of Black Americans. And I just downloaded some Black history facts that I'm going to share with the commissioners. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Are there any other commissioner comments? Then we are in adjournment.